Coming to you from the Windy City. Welcome to Let's Talk Shop, a podcast about all things cloud and enterprise tech. Listen to insights and guest interviews with IT thought leaders and professionals. Now, here's your host, Elias Kanaser.
Today's podcast is super cool. As usual, as all my podcasts are super cool, but it is a friend of the show. It is someone that has been with me from the beginning of the launch of the podcast, a very good friend, Steve Madden of Equinix. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun.
So, Steve, everybody knows you, I know, but just in case we have a few listeners that don't know what you do at Equinix, do you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Yeah. Steve Madden. I'm VP of Segment Marketing and Digital Transformation at Equinix. But more importantly, my role is to help customers think through their digital transformation strategy. And so we spend a lot of time providing them insights and data on what other customers are doing and helping them think through their own stages towards their own transformation success.
Steve and I go back to my Gartner days, and I always enjoy the conversation with him because although he works for Equinix, and I'm sure we're going to sprinkle in a bunch of Equinix stuff in here, but he's truly a thinker. He challenges. He used to challenge us. He's challenged me on some positions. So hence why I always enjoy the conversation with him. And based on the topics I have today, this is, let's just say this is going to be a spirited conversation. So, Steve, I know you talk to a lot of customers about digital transformation strategy, about the digital economy, but maybe a good place to start is why don't we level set a little bit? Give me your approach, your viewpoint of what the state of the digital economy is today. What does it look like? Maybe what's changed since last year, but just the state of the digital economy.
Okay. I think in general, people approach to digital transformation and their attempt to look at the digital economy the same way we used to in IT approach everything. Like, let's just add some technology or some capability to our company that we didn't have before, mobile first, cloud first, whatever. And yet the challenge with that was that's actually not what digital transformation means. Digital transformation means that your business and how you interact with your business and how you generate revenue is predominantly driven by technology, not traditional business processes. So if you're not converting how you are able to do business with you electronically, you're not really transforming at all. And then when most of your companies in your economic or ecosystem have become digital, then the interaction between those companies are becoming digital and electronic. And that's what we're saying is the digital ecosystem. How much of business today is being done purely B2B electronically and B2C electronically versus traditional practices?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So one of the other things that we've talked about in the past is that everything is pretty much moving to a subscription-based economy. Is that part of this digital economy that you're talking about? Where does that fit in?
Yeah. So, we're living in a digital subscription economy now. We see that at home. Like let's level set to something we can relate to right away, which is, remember when we used to buy records, or then we bought CDs, we brought home CDs and DVDs and stuck them on the shelf.
Yep.
Today, people just download an app, subscribe to a service, and they have access to all the music they want to have access to. And so that's a sign of now I can get the latest, greatest, pick a huge star like Taylor Swift. I can get a new album and I could be listening to it the next day. I didn't talk to a human at all to do that. The flip side of that from a digital business standpoint is now someone who is distributing music in the music industry. And let's pick Taylor Swift again. When she released her Midnight's album, it was being streamed by 184 million devices within 24 hours.
That's insane.
Yeah, no, and no physical distribution or traditional model could have even competed with that. But it also means if you want to be in the business of distributing music, and so I want in on helping Taylor Swift launch her music, I said, sure, can you deliver it to 200 million people in a day? And if you can't, then you're just not even in that business anymore. So it's the whole idea of subscription is that's how people want to buy. That's how people want to sort of sell. And it's moving its way into other forms of infrastructure. And we'll, if you look at the confluence of energy prices, the refresh rates of hardware, all these things getting to the point, the cost of getting rid of hardware, e-waste management and everything, it's becoming so convoluted that it's actually really a burden to have to deal with all those functions when all you really want to do is use the asset to generate revenue and then move on. And so part of what we've been seeing and what we've been saying is it's becoming less and less practical to own anything unless that's the business you're actually in, is providing that. And so that's a shift that's happened. A long time. We started with on-demand compute, and then cloud kind of came with the cloud-like model. But we're finding it's getting to the point where we have like serverless architectures. There's becoming data centerless architectures. They're all still there, but I don't want to have to deal with that. I just want to subscribe, use it, and move on.
Yeah, and I think AI doesn't make things easier, right? So I think AI even exacerbates things a little bit more because, the cost of these NVIDIA chips or AMD chips, it's insane. So imagine the amount of capital that you would have to spend. So from your viewpoint, and I know you work for Equinix, and part of what you guys do is sell colocation.
Right.
But are you seeing a private deployment of AI on company hardware for companies where it's not their business, to your point, to provide this?
Right.
Are you seeing that, or is that a small number? Are most of these workloads going to be on a subscription-based hardware, whether Equinix is offering it or whether it's the cloud provider that's offering it?
Yeah, so good questions. And you're right. If COVID accelerated digital, AI has completely exacerbated it. It's amplified the problem. And so we see four primary use cases for deploying AI. One is, I have no idea what I want to do with AI. I want to play around and sort of figure it out, but I don't want to buy anything yet until I know what it is I need to do. And so NVIDIA Launchpad, which was launched at Equinix like 3 years ago, was a cloud-like model where you could just sign up, get a model, get access to data, and you could just go and actually give you help. Cloud has the same thing. A lot of people are using cloud because they just don't know yet what this is going to materially look like. The second one is the do-it-yourself people. They're like, nah, I know what I want to do. I just want to own the hardware. I just want to go build it myself, continue to own the infrastructure. And a lot of what's driving that is not so much private AI, but private storage. They want to keep control of all the data. They have all the compute, co-located with that. And to them, it's more important as they have regulatory control and understand what they're doing and ownership than just the idea of subscription. But because we have this ecosystem providers like Lambda Labs, CoreWeave, and all these other companies that can give you GPU as a service, model as a service, or anything you want as a service, even in the DIY or the private model, you can still choose to subscribe to the infrastructure and not own it. And again, if NVIDIA's chips are refreshing like every 2 years, and the power performance is dramatically different, so the cost of operating it is going down, then staying on that hardware for a long period of time actually makes no economic sense. And this, like I said, this increasing refresh rate and this churn and this expertise required to even run that infrastructure, it's all InfiniBand, it's all liquid cooled. I mean, if you stand next to these things, the cabinets around it vibrate. It's performing at that high performance. It just makes no sense to own it. And so that's why we also have a DGX service as a managed service with NVIDIA as well, which is the fourth one, which is I just want to go full managed service. I don't have the time to build and operate and do all that. Just give me the answer. I just want to start using the results. I
love it. So would you agree then with me that, those folks that are thinking about like a private on-premises traditional data center AI, I mean, that has a lot of challenges, right? First of all, it's the capital challenge, but there's also a sustainability play there, right? So these AI chips, you kind of mentioned it in passing.
Yeah.
They require a lot of energy, but most importantly, they're also going to require a ton of cooling, which is energy indirectly, right?
Yeah.
So that's another advantage of leveraging either an Equinix or the cloud providers or the managed services providers, is that they are built to leverage and take advantage of, let's call it green energy or clean energy, whatever you want to call it, where the others, not just the rack stack refresh price problems, but their footprint is going to be a problem. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Essentially, is like I said, it's a confluence of things. One, we're trying to demonstrate that we are actively, dramatically reducing our carbon footprint on the planet. And so there's a lot of investment, huge amounts of investment in green energy, more efficient technologies, reducing the PUE, the power unit efficiency of your data center, as much as possible. You have to be able to demonstrate that you're leading in that space. Otherwise, essentially, it's waste. And I say that because we think of it as total cost of ownership. Like, I already own it. So because I already own it, I should just run it into the ground. And the reality is that's not entirely true these days.
Right.
The cost of power and the availability of power has changed. And if your PUE or your price power unit efficiency is high, like a 2.5 or a 3, you're paying 3 times more for the same power and the same environment with the data center as you would be from someone like Equinix or a data center provider. And if you then add the amplified power consumption and liquid cooling and expense of providing that infrastructure, you've increased your IT debt, you haven't improved any efficiency, and you've got a long-term problem. And so we were already seeing a lot of enterprise customers getting out of the data center business completely. Yep. Because they just realized that they just didn't want to deal with it.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah, the reasons for doing it went away. And unfortunately, on a real estate business, a 10-year window means that, unless you're planning on generating a large amount of revenue, it's a revenue center for you in the next 10 years, it just doesn't make sense. So to then overinvest in that also doesn't make sense. And so people are not doing that.
I holistically agree. Let me push you a little bit on this sustainability. And here we're going to go into, I'm not expecting I don't know if there is a perfect answer, but I'd love your opinion, your thoughts on it. On the one hand, we have technology like crypto and mining and Bitcoin, and we both know that's not going to go away. And they're going to find more practical, realistic use cases for that. So that's a technology that is consuming a significant amount of energy, requires a lot of cooling, yada, yada, yada. And it's happening, I want to say, in micro data centers. So not even the traditional data centers that might have been built kind of up to, this is in people's garages where a lot of these are happening.
Abandoned buildings.
And then on the other hand, we just got introduced to AI. And AI requires, again, sort of the same amount of requirements for power and cooling. Realistically, with all of these requirements, and we still don't know what's coming down the pipe, we still don't know, again, they're talking about AI being able to generate video. That's going to be even more insane from a requirements perspective. So realistically, can we do this responsibly? Can we really have the sources of energy to do it the right way? Because I'm becoming skeptical.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think you'll find there's 2 combinations of this. One is, are people being sensible about what it is we're talking about and what that's going to require, or are people just going crazy and buying up everything and trying to build everything because they assume this is what's coming? We're taking a standpoint of it's still really new. No one really knows anything, but you can be sensible about how you plan. But the second one, this is something I've lived on even back in my financial services days at JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, was necessity is the mother of invention.
I agree.
So if you look at Bitcoin, Ethereum switching to a new logic model that required 95% less compute eliminated the need for those mining farms for that overnight. Things like that can still happen. And when we go the other way with large language models and generative AI, OpenAI's infrastructure costs $300 million a day. It's unlikely that people are going to offset or subsidize that for everyone everywhere. And so where I see this breaking even is that people are going to focus on, it's the same thing as not owning your own data center. It doesn't make sense for me to own my own large language model that does all generative video. But I can buy an inference engine from someone as middleware and use it as part of my application to do what I needed to do. But I didn't need to train it. It's already trained. So if you start thinking about inference engines or pre-trained models as middleware, then you're really just using the benefit of those models. You're not trying to create those models. And that's why you'll see things like visual computing, whether it's seeing facial recognition or security camera footage or number plate or license plate recognition, have thousands of use cases that aren't consistent, but it's the same model. So there's no point in building, 1,000 models to do, visual recognition or visual computing. So I'm expecting that's going to happen. It's going to normalize to where we see real business improvement. And a lot of it is on operational cost reduction for AI. It's where it's going to go first. And it's going to launch as middleware. And the inference engines, by the way, don't even necessarily need GPUs. They can run on regular CPUs. It's GPUs that's for learning and training. So the power consumption requirements aren't going to be as high for inference at the edge. So when we see airlines doing bag tracking and better, flight control management and handling changes and dynamic changes and resource control with inference engines at the edge, or quick service restaurants doing facial recognition and menu control and speeding up your orders and waste management of food and all that stuff's happening now, which is leveraging models, solving for AI, but isn't all the big, large language model, generative AI requirements. They're just taking what people have already built and applying them to solve real business problems.
Okay. So is it fair that everything that we've been talking about so far is part of the conversation that you've been having for years around digital economy?
Yeah.
Isn't all of this just another component that really feeds digital economy and digital transformation? Is that fair?
Yes. And I have that conversation too, and everybody jumps up and down like, oh my God, AI is so new and look what it's come, it's changed the world. So, well, hang on. We knew data was growing at a 50+% compound annual growth.
Something needed to happen.
Yeah, humans can't read and look through that. It's not possible. So we had analytics, and we had, computer science and data scientists and analytics and models to pick out anomalies and do anomaly detection and predictive analytics and all that kind of stuff. And now we're kind of at the point where if you know what the steps are you would do based on the information that you were provided, then why not do what we did with electronic trading like 15 years ago? Create a trading model, and the trading model knows what to do when certain things happen, and the traders are actually maintaining the model. They're not placing any trades. And that's happening in like 100,000 times a second because no human can possibly do that. Right. And so when you get to this level of maturity and evolution that you've got to handle this much data across this many different interfaces or instruments or even outputs, it has to be done by a model and done through AI. And so what I'm sort of saying is people have built that experience into the model. The model now can handle it based on the data. And if you can subscribe to the model as middleware, then you're just as clever as someone who understands building management systems without having to have all that experience. So it'll come across as a tool rather than an expertise thing.
Interesting. So I know that you and your team, your group, release every year GXI.
Yeah.
So what is GXI and how does it tie into this conversation?
GXI is called the Global Interconnection Index, and it originally started as a guide to say, if people are transferring from being traditional businesses to digital or electronic e-businesses, then we should see the amount of traffic exchange between these companies go up. And so what we then said was, since we're in a position to track the majority of that, and we're able to get access to the data to show, even for locations we're not in, it's an industry-wide report. What does that look like? And how fast is that growing? And based on what we see, forecasting out, where do we think it's going to go? And so we got to the extent where we could show you who's building infrastructure in which locations around the world, who's connecting to who in those, and at what rate is this growing? And so it was interesting because you would say things like, everyone's moving to cloud. You're like, okay, for a few years we saw that. But then we saw that the edge was growing twice as fast as the cloud. We said, yeah, but hang on. That was true for maybe this block of time, but it's shifting. Now there's a lot more activity and data being driven at the edge. And so we were able to sort of be in front of the market by about 3 to 4 years. And I think what's kept this report going, because like other big companies had similar things, like Cisco's VNI is now sort of just semi-updated on a website, but it used to be an annual report as well, is because it's been so far 89.9% accurate, which is pretty good. So I've seen investors pick it up, analysts pick it up, service providers, new service providers who are starting new businesses pick it up. A lot of enterprises use it, financial services specifically, network service providers. So a lot of people are using it to help them think through, what does that mean to my infrastructure? What does that mean to where I need to be able to do business or enter new markets? Am I planning for that equivalent growth, right, and investment? So it's become useful. And so we've expanded on that to say everything else we know about what we see on the platform and conversations with customers, and when we've had these dialogues, all goes back into the knowledge base. And so it helps us build a more rounded report that explains more things at a higher level.
So one of the things that caught my attention in the report was there was a section on where you're advising customers kind of where to start, what to do, kind of how to act on this, right?
Yeah.
And it was all about digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Everyone's talking today about AI infrastructure.
Yeah.
You tell someone, hey, you need to build a digital infrastructure, and they're like, no, I want to build an AI infrastructure. So how would you respond to that?
Well, so it's back to the maturity model. If you don't have a digital infrastructure, you actually can't build an AI infrastructure. An AI infrastructure requires that you have the connectivity, you have the data distribution and data architecture in place, and you've solved for all the fundamental security and logistical issues, because then you can do this large-scale computation, which is going to take data from lots of places, moved around. It's going to exchange data with a lot of different counterparties. You're going to be using a lot of third-party services. So it's still a hybrid digital infrastructure from edge to cloud that has to exist underneath that. It's just now, like I said, like a maturity step. It's like now I'm going to use it to do a lot more private AI or hybrid AI. And so, yeah, it's become an issue in that people are jumping on the trend because someone told them that they have to have this capability. But it's the same thing that happened with COVID. People didn't have a way to handle the fact that all their people moved home for a year and had to adjust and adapt quickly. And they suddenly said, we need, remote workplace and we need VDI. So all these things were already there. It's just they weren't already applying them or using them in their infrastructure to keep it up to date to what digital requirements are changing towards.
So you're saying they don't contradict each other. So in a digital infrastructure, based on what I read, you need three components primarily. You need the digital core. I'm assuming that's so you can establish the right connectivity in order to be able to connect with whoever you need to connect. There's the ecosystem. That's where you're going to get your subscription-based services, products, etc. That's where you're going to be able to exchange information with your partners. And then it's the edge. And we even heard Samsung, I think, is going to announce in the next few days a new phone that is AI capable. So the edge in all of its infinite variations is definitely true. So then AI would sit on top of this digital infrastructure. So without this, to your earlier point, you can't build. You can't, right?
Yeah, it's the difference between another way of putting it. And I'm finding better terms that resonate better with people as I meet with them. But if you think about it, business revenue innovation comes from operational technology. IT typically responds to business requests. It usually isn't the leader of net new revenue products, or it isn't considered a revenue center. It's considered a cost center. And so people are building AI infrastructure because we need AI are already coming at this problem completely wrong. Digital is driving companies to rethink their entire value proposition to be delivered through technology, right? Which means, how are you going to operationally change the way you interact with your customers and the market and your operating place? How are you going to change the way you work with partners directly? And you're right, they're partners, but they're also not just the people you're buying from. Anyone you want to sell to, the ecosystem there as well. Yeah. And then how do you do that at scale with the largest regional aggregations of, I call it digital density, which is where all the clouds and all the major network providers and things are. And then you've got physical density, which is where is my population of people, or where is my operations base, or where do I need to be physically close? And digital infrastructure solves for that. AI then can enable you to add intelligence at both ends. I can have intelligence on how I'm developing my value proposition, but I have intelligence on how I'm using it in the real world in real time. It's an overlay on top of your digital infrastructure, which we say core ecosystem edge, digital density, population centers, and proximity to physical locations is what you need. And so that is all available today through a subscription-based service. You don't have to necessarily buy anything unless that's the business model you're in, right? Is to provide it yourself, and you're selling it to other people.
So I know in GXI, I noticed in GXI there were, I believe, 8 or 9 trends that were highlighted. I don't want to ask you about all of them, but if I were to say, hey, what are your favorite two? What are the two that really stand out? I know you start working on the GXI, and people don't know, how long some of this research takes. It takes months. So while it published in January of 24, I believe,
Right.
January, February, right?
No, January. Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, it took months before preparing this and brainstorming. So a lot of things change. I mean, I can't believe, but, about 12 months ago, the most important thing that we were talking about in the tech world was, Amazon's custom silicon and Google's custom silicon and Microsoft's custom. I mean, the whole thing was around custom silicon and chips. And then overnight, everything flipped to AI. So I know you guys have been working on this for a while. Of everything that you've put into this report, what are one or two things that really resonate with you? Like when you take a step back, you're like, you know what, we got this one really right.
Yeah, no. So I think the highlights we put in simply because we didn't think on its own it was putting the right emphasis on what some of the data that you're looking at the GXI is actually saying. So they're indicating things that we know we can back up with the data. What I like to do with the index is before the start of every year is saying, where are things actually going? Because we know from all the research we look at, and how much of that does the index actually show? Or do we need to actually go and get new, different data to understand this additional thing so we can add it to the index with the same credibility of what's already there? For me, the one we highlighted in GXI that's obviously the biggest is because of the if you look at all the highlights, because of the culmination of those, this whole digital subscription economy is essentially saying that technology is becoming mostly throwaway. We used to sit on it and run it like for 5 to 10 years and do everything as a long-term fixed IT real estate debt model and build IT debt and capitalize and depreciation. That is essentially almost gone to be completely about cost of revenue. And cost of revenue is how much is my IT costing me towards how much revenue am I generating off it? And if I add more investment into my IT, does my revenue go up? If the answer is yes, then you invest more in IT. Whereas a TCO model fixes the cost of IT to be a subset of the cost of the company's overall revenue, and you're fixed and capped, which in a digital economy, the thing that's going to drive you your revenue is not the thing you want to cap or even put in a TCO model. You want to release that. So what I think is going to happen is while people are agreeing that the idea of subscription economy is coming along, they haven't yet understood that means I've got to stop following a TCO model and look at price performance per watt, and performance is unit of revenue. So how much at what cost do I get what unit of revenue? Right. And I put watt in there just to call out the sustainability aspect of it and at what a functional level. And the companies that do that typically run around 60 to 70% of their cost of revenue is technology. But the majority of the revenue is digital, right, in digital business. The thing that's coming after this is if you think about the digital economy and how fast it's growing, at some point you have to sort of step back and say, in these places of business where all of these partners who are already digital and already want to buy and sell that way are already there, how much is that digital economy worth? What's the value prop of that? And so when people start looking at that digital economy as an accessible asset that they can easily just buy infrastructure and deploy and plug into, and now they're part of that market, I think we're going to start seeing the real shift between conversations around GDP not being about goods and services sold, because that's still a very old model and doesn't take into account a lot of digital, towards no, if I'm actually not in the digital economy and I haven't got maybe 60+% of my revenue coming from there, then how far behind am I really on this scale? Because people who are already there are growing in terms of revenue and scale exponentially faster than companies that don't even have a digital infrastructure or aren't even using the right terms yet, or still talking about moving to cloud. You kind of have to sit down with them and say, in the 2 to 3 years it's going to take you to finish what you're doing, you're going to be 9 years behind these other accounts that have already gone down that path. So I pay attention to the follower language we have in the index,
right?
Because we saw followers change gears and do double what they did the prior year. So they woken up like, holy crap, we have to go
behind.
But the skill set and the people and the resources and the time they need to do that to reach that or close that gap is high. And so we're going to have to see partners step up. We're going to have to see MSPs kick in. You see MSPs already leaning in on AI. But this ecosystem has to get a lot more shared model rather than the idea of I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to run everything myself. I'm going to own everything myself. It's going to take you 3 to 4 times longer to get anywhere if you do that.
So, I mean, this begs the question. And this doesn't just apply to Equinix, so I'm going to generalize it a little bit. I mean, although Equinix is the 800-pound gorilla, but I'm going to generalize it a little bit. So when I think of an ecosystem, in the context of this conversation, I can't help but think of, well, Equinix kind of is that marketplace, right? It's a meet me location. I can pretty much interact and connect with pretty much partners and customers all from Equinix. So when I'm looking at it, Equinix becomes that marketplace, that ecosystem. So as you were talking, and I was thinking exactly what you said, is that, everyone has to really step up, right? Everyone has to be able to contribute because this AI boom is not going to slow down anytime soon. I mean, heck, just look at the stock of NVIDIA. Their sales are just, it's insane. And it's not like, they sold 20 billion this quarter and next quarter, all of a sudden they're going to sell 500 million. It doesn't happen that way. This thing is going to be, it's going to go over multiple years.
Yes.
And here I'm not expecting you to give me an exact answer because you may or may not have this yet, but where is Equinix going to contribute? What is Equinix going to do to contribute? Because again, you guys are, if you're not the entire ecosystem, you're a big chunk of it.
Yeah, no. So we have a really unique position, and you could say that we were either super clever or super lucky, or maybe a bit of both.
Maybe both.
But it just so happened that because we were the meet me room for all of the major networks, and therefore picked up the majority of the internet. And then everything else sort of gravitated around that. So all cloud connectivity, we have the most cloud on-ramps in the world, et cetera, et cetera. Then that's where the most exchange points are. And Equinix is a data center company, but we're a retail interconnection company. And yeah, we have some wholesale type stuff, but we're not saying everybody puts everything they have in Equinix, but people put their most business critical, interconnection related functions in Equinix because it's the proximity to digital density, proximity to physical proximity to density. And so we've seen that grown and scale. And now as services become more electronic, there's more things people can do with that connectivity. So it used to be I'm just subscribing to storage, or I'm going to subscribe to a DDoS attack prevention or infrastructure type stuff. Now it's like I can spin up a business and connect to a payments platform, a call center, distribution services, and logistics management, all through API calls on top of the platform. And it's exciting to me when you start to see we're not just talking about IT for IT's sake here. We're talking about business, and business operational practices are being done exactly the same way you would do IT infrastructure, which is why IT then becomes the front runner of how do I actually implement business processes and business workflows, and not just technology processes and workflows. Because we're still in the Salesforce to SFDC to go into ServiceNow to go into the, and connect IT workflows and back office apps. But when you start connecting business workflows at scale and can sub in whoever you want in a completely open market that allows you access to everything you can want, including all of the clouds, so they're all there too, it becomes pretty exciting as to what you can actually do there.
Is that going to be, is Platform Equinix kind of the glue for all of this? Is where all the innovation is going to be built on?
Yeah, right now we've got it. The problem is there's a lot to do. So we're trying to make sure we solve for things in their sort of sequential order. But the first one was, can we make it easier for people to stand up the infrastructure they need as a subscription service anywhere in the world? So can I get the same kind of cloud-like model, but not in the cloud, in a private AI or a private colo or cloud adjacent, or even at the edge adjacent? And that's helping our service providers, because the service providers are also subscribing to that infrastructure to offer services back to enterprises. And so we get this compound effect. So we're enabling a set of digital services to speed up the idea of being able to get you to a digital service quickly. The next logical step after that is how do we make sure people who are on the platform can literally see what's available to them on this platform, and simplify the interactions between buyers and sellers and consumers and producers, so we accelerate the value exchange on top of that. And if you have a global fabric that's worldwide available everywhere with an API call, you connect to anyone else who's on the fabric, then delivery of those services actually becomes relatively simple. So we have the ability to accelerate and amplify the ecosystem benefits that people are getting from the platform, which obviously help us as a consumption of the platform, but help our providers more. So our partners today, for every dollar we get through a partner-related deal with an enterprise, they're getting between 10 and 200. So the amount of money our ecosystem is making leveraging the platform is exceptionally bigger than any amount of money we make, which is the definition of a platform business model. So when we say platform Equinix, it's a real platform business model. It's not just an IT platform.
Folks, I'm going to put links in the description to the GXI report. I found it fascinating. I think there's data points in there for everyone, whether you're a service provider or a customer. I think it helps you kind of put things in perspective. It's worth a read. It's worth going through. We're going to do another podcast with one of Steve's colleagues to kind of dig a little deeper into GXI, understand how to read it, how to use it. But that'll be a conversation for another day. But I truly enjoy this. It's year to year, so you can see how things are changing, how things are shifting. So I'll put a link to that below. Steve, the conversation with you is always fascinating. I'm going to close out with one last question.
Yeah.
I'm sure you followed in the news, the whole thing that's happening with Google Gemini and some of the things that Google has, stopped generating certain images. On the one hand, you're like, well, oh my God, so how could they make these types of mistakes? And on the other hand, at least my own opinion, it'll be hard to separate people's bias. I mean, we all have biases, and there are programmers and developers that are writing these algorithms, these whatever, right? How do you feel like, I don't know, ethical AI will happen? How do you think we can reduce the bias, the errors? I mean, nothing's bulletproof, obviously. But what's your position on it, Doug? How could we maybe reduce it? Maybe if not eliminate it, reduce it?
Yeah, it's a big problem. The World Economic Forum listed it as up there as one of the biggest challenges of 2024, right next to climate change. So they consider it a huge issue too.
Right.
I think the challenge we have is that the capabilities that AI bring are so valuable and amplified. But look at something simple as if you had a bunch of people in the world and you're trying to exchange information. And misinformation is what they classified in the World Economic Forum's listing of what the biggest issue was going to be, was misinformation, right, not the use of AI, and fakes and things like that. So when we had to use a journalist in order to get news broadcast to a lot of population, then journalists were held accountable to make sure the information was accurate. Then you got social media, which doesn't hold anybody accountable that the information is accurate. And now you can generate things which understand AI is going to try and provide an answer, whether in most cases when there isn't one. So its job is to hallucinate, right, based on what data it has. Now, if you're going to then use that information to make real decisions, then it's still back on you. But we're not ready as a society to understand, is what I'm looking at real, or is what I'm looking at not real, or complete misinformation, I'm being manipulated, social engineering and so forth. So I think it's going to be a huge growing pain. If you think about it, how long did it take to educate parents on what it means when you give your kid an iPhone? Right. What they're actually able to do with it, and what can show up on the internet and is now there forever. All that stuff is terrifying. So I think where people are subscribing to pre-generated models provided from legitimate sources that have the controls and sensibilities built into them, then it's perfectly safe. But where we're off generating our own things or using those technologies to do, clearly things that aren't legitimate or ethical, we've got to go back to who's providing the model and make sure those safeguards are in there. You can't stop people, if there was 1 in 1,000 bad people And that person could mess up so many things. But if you give them a computer and the internet, they can do a lot of damage.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's gonna be tough. I don't think I struggled the same conversation I had about with the large IT companies about putting a pause on AI. The actual operational efficiencies we're getting completely outweigh. Well, it's hard to say, but they're needed if we're going to save the planet, basically. But at the same time, we have to pay attention and not treat this like another technology, but it's a change in business and how people interact and how they do their jobs and work, live, and play. We've got to pay attention to that and think that through. I use AI and I use ChatGPT to mostly reword things.
Sure.
I've listed a lot of thoughts and it sounds completely convoluted. Can you reword this for me? And what I get back is a much better way of particularly articulating an idea. But I didn't have to fix it. I didn't ask it for any information. It didn't create anything. It didn't generate anything.
It just helped.
Fine. Yep. But if I ask it, what do you think about this? And it gives me an answer, and then I act on that answer. Did I know that it only knows up until September 2019? We're going to have to be smarter about how we use these tools effectively.
I think that's a great answer. I think putting a pause on it is, in my opinion, almost impossible because you're never going to get everyone in the world to put a pause on this. So putting a pause on it just means someone else is going to get ahead. I agree with you. We're going to have to find a way to do things more responsibly, to approach it in a more intelligent manner, artificial intelligence, but it's growing pains. That's why when everyone was kind of pissed off, let's say at Google, I'm like, well, yeah, okay, it wasn't ideal, but I understand. Like these aren't, it's not easy, and it's going to take time. But I think we'll get there. I hope we'll get there.
Well, and it's happened already. Just remember when the stock exchange would go into a mass sell-off?
Sure.
When all the models were triggered to get out because it hit a
certain level, yeah.
And they had to shut down the exchange.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
We've seen it before. It does get out of control. It does go unintended consequences. Things do happen, but then that hasn't happened or won't happen, at least not in the same way, anytime again soon. I think that we have to just be, how much of it can we preempt and then how much can we respond is going to be the answer.
Steve, the conversation with you is always fascinating.
This wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be.
I saved some questions for when I get off the recording.
Okay.
Those I want your friendly opinion. Let's
put
it that way. If you didn't, so here's the thing. I have to be careful because I don't want to put you in a position also to, you still work for a company. And so there's a fine balance there. But no, you were fantastic. I want to thank you for sharing all of your thoughts. And we're going to have you again soon. I like I said, we talk almost once a year on the podcast and things change so dramatically. Like if you go and listen to what we were talking about last year, there's some similarities, but it was still very different than where we are today. And I think with the pace of change, I think 6 months is going to be too much. If we talk in another 6 months, it's going to be interesting to see where this AI thing goes in 6 and 12 months from now.
Exactly. The rate of change is also dramatically. Yeah.
My friend, thank you so much for making time. We will chat again soon and have a good time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
You bet. Take care.